Hello everybody, my name is ManuS and welcome to another MTGCardmarket modern video series of mine. Today I'm going to bring you some modern with Reckless Zoo, a deck that has not gotten a whole lot of exposure recently, but that might have some serious potential to do well in the format, especially with decks like Death Shadow being one of the top decks, and this being an aggressive go wide strategy that they cannot stop well enough with their removal, and also has the potential to go through or around their big blockers and kill them before they can kill us. So that's the theory. And yeah, I have been writing about this deck when AER Revolt came out, because Nanam Renegade and Hidden Herbalists both seemed like potential new additions to the deck. A lot of people were very skeptical of the Herbalists. I wasn't so convinced, I at least wanted to give them a try. I could imagine that they maybe would not work out well enough, but I at least wanted to try them. And I gotta say, the people that were basically convinced that they are not a great fit were mostly right. The card is just too high variance, and sure, it increases the amount and potential for nut draws, but ultimately it just plays out too awkwardly too often, basically, and that's why I moved away from them. This list is largely based on a list by Kyle Bogemis that he used to win I think Michigan State Championships in Modern. I slightly changed it, mostly the sideboard, and updated it with AER Revolt in the main deck. So let's go over the list real quick before we jump into a competitive Modern league to see how we're doing and how the deck plays out. First of all, we have all the 1-drop creatures. For Goblin Guide, not much explanation needed here. One of the prime 1-drops for such an explosive aggressive deck. The haste makes it also as the prime 1-drop to play last, because it doesn't, if you have a haster, it doesn't really matter where you play them over another creature, because ultimately the damage outcome will be the same, but the amount of attackers might differ. So for example, if you go 1-drop into double 1-drop, then on turn 3 you can go Goblin Guide plus Attacker's Command if you have 3 lands, which is much better than having a non-haster in that spot. So it definitely pays to use him last a lot of the time, so you have the maximum amount of attackers in a given turn. If you have other creatures, of course. If you don't, you can just throw it out there. Next we have Curdape, one of the better 1-drops. 3 toughness is pretty good against a bunch of blockers and the occasional Pyroclasm, which is currently not that popular. But there's also plenty of 2 attack, 2 power creatures that punish the creatures that have less toughness, but Curdape can attack into them with impunity, stuff like Snapcaster Mage, to name one of the most prominent, for example. Other 1-drop is Experiment 1. That card is a bit hit or miss in a lot of decks, but not in this deck, basically. This deck makes great use of him, partially thanks to Burning Tree Emissary, and simply because there's so many 3 toughness or even 3 power 1-drops in Modern that you can easily get it to 3/3 on turn 2 by the time you're attacking, making it almost a better Nacatl that can occasionally grow to 4 even, although not that often in this deck. Mostly if you happen to be in one of these rarer games where you have to hardcast your Rampager or postboard when we bring in Tarmogoyfs. But yeah, even then, it's basically most of the time a Nacatl would regenerate. Next we have a new addition. I basically cut the Vexing Devils from Bogemis list for those, because Vexing Devil has nice synergy with Experiment 1, but other than that, he's very hit or miss. Punisher cards have always been sort of a problem in the sense that the opponent can choose basically the side of the split card they want you to use. If you consider like a Punisher card a split card, and the opponent gets to pick the side of the split card basically. And yeah, while the direct damage is kind of good in this deck because it's so aggressive and explosive, I rather prefer a good resilient attacker to make the deck like more consistent. And the Death Touch has really great synergy with Rancor and Rampager, and also allows it to attack into bigger blockers like a Tarmogoyf with impunity, which basically also adds potential extra damage to the deck, because either they take 2 or they trade their Tarmogoyf for it, and if they trade their Tarmogoyf for it, we can probably have better attacks next turn with our creatures that would have otherwise died to Tarmogoyf. So it indirectly has a similar effect on a lot of games as Vexing Devil, while being less explosive but more consistent basically. At least that's my theory. And last but not least, we have Wild Nacatl, the all-star, the reason why decks like this exist. 1 mana, 3/3. It's just stellar. Although it's worth noting that sometimes in this deck it's actually only a 2/2, because there's a bunch of occasions where you only have 1 land, or the second land you draw doesn't activate it in rare cases. So there will actually be situations where it's a 2/2, so you can theoretically argue that it is potentially marginally worse than Experiment 1 in this deck, sort of. Like, that tells you something if a card is potentially slightly better than Nacatl, because it is actually probably a bit easier to get Experiment 1 to 3/3 than Nacatl sometimes, especially if you keep like an opening hand with a 1-lander and Simian Spirit Guide, for example, that will usually leave Nacatl at 2/2, but easily get Experiment 1 to a 3/3 still. Alright, on to the next cards. We have for Lightning Bolt, not much explanation needed, very efficient removal, ways to finish off the opponent, just a flexible card that works really well with a strategy to either generate tempo or finish off the opponent. Reckless Bushwhacker, another, sorry for the coughing, another card that makes this deck basically possible and sort of gives it its name, which is not even that correct actually, because not every version, as you can see, runs 4 of it, simply because the card is kind of situational. Like, you basically need either Emissary for it to work, or you need to draw 3 lands or 2 lands and a Spirit Guide, which is kind of a lot in a deck that runs 18 lands into a Spirit Guide. And yeah, I mean, also if you go for the 3-land thing and don't have a Emissary, you also need to have a creature to go along with it, or at least like another 1 mana spell like Lightning Bolt or Rancor usually, which is not that hard, but sometimes can be a bit tricky. Like, sometimes it makes you do weird stuff like not play your last 1-drop on turn 2 so you can 1-drop Bushwhacker on turn 3, for example. So it has its downsides, and it is kind of bad in multiples. Like, the first copy is almost always great, but if you see 2 of those, the second one can get really tricky to like utilize well. So that's why Karl Borgemes chose to run 3, and so far I really liked the choice of 3, because the deck just felt very smooth and consistent, and I can see the logic behind only running 3 Bushwhackers, especially given that I have played the archetype myself a bunch, especially with like 4 Bushwhackers, and the exact reason that I imagine why he only wants 3 is what came up quite a bunch when I played the deck with 4, so it is a very reasonable change. It's not the most obvious and the easiest to make, since the card seems so powerful and important, but ultimately the deck gets more consistent if you shave 1, I think. And yeah, next we have Rancor. That card, I think, is a bit questionable and a bit, yeah, I don't know. The card definitely got a ton better in my opinion with Renegade, thanks to the interaction between Death Touch and Trample, making it so that no matter what blocks a Renegade with trample, they will always take all but 1 damage. So if this attacks is like a force 3 trample into a Tarmogoyf and they block to trade, they still take 3 to the face, which is great. And yeah, I mean, this basically, in a deck with so many creatures, sort of just another 1 mana creature that adds 2 attack, 2 power to the board, and provides trample to trample over small blockers like Lingering Souls and stuff like that, which is not irrelevant, especially since there's quite a bunch of Lingering Souls these days, with Abzan being currently kind of the go-to black-green mid-range deck. So it's definitely relevant and adds to the explosiveness and punch of the deck and makes it easier to get damage through, sort of. And yeah, it also has the added upside of being repeatedly usable. Like if they trade with your Renegade, you just get back your Rancor, slap it on the next guy, and next turn go at it again. So that's nice in the games that drag out a little longer. And yeah, well, Emissary doesn't need much explanation. Combos with Bushwhacker for the nut draws, and also just provides really explosive draws in general, like 1-drop into Emissary into double 1-drop is not much worse than 1-drop into Bushwhacker, into Emissary Bushwhacker, for example. In certain cases even better, especially if you have a Bushwhacker for the turn after. And yeah, the last creature / spell is Gorkland Rampager. Also got a little better in my opinion thanks to the interaction with Nanam Renegade, a creature that the opponent usually wants to get rid of. If they don't have a removal, they have to block, and then Rampager is a nice blowout. Otherwise, it's generally just a solid way to deal with big blockers like Tarmogoyf and Tassigor and stuff like that, and Death Shadow. So it's like a combat trick that can, in the very floody, grindy games, still be used as a creature, which isn't irrelevant. It comes up sometimes. It's more relevant than one might think. And then we have the All-Star, the card the deck should probably be named after. It's Attacker's Command, because unlike Bushwhacker, additional copies don't really get awkward, the card, since it doesn't need any enabling and the 3rd mana to be enabled and stuff. So if you have the typical 2 land draw, you can use as many of them as you want over consecutive turns, and each of them is going to hurt like hell for your opponent if you have some sort of board presence. The usual mode that happens almost all of the time is just the 3 damage and +1/+1 to your team, but the life gain suppression can still come up. The land thing basically never comes up, like once in a million years or something, like in a spot where you want to trick your opponent and go Attacker's Command on their turn, drop a land, deal 3 to them, and I don't know, bold to do 2 things at once when they thought you can only do command or bold. But that's such a fringe case that it rarely ever happens. And yeah, last we have 18 lands, 12 fetch lands, minimum amount of basics and duals to put it all together, and Simian Spirit Guide. That's kind of new technology and an idea by Kyle Bogamus that I at least wanted to give a try. And the way he implemented, I can see it being nice. Generally I'm not a fan of this card in the deck, just because it's kind of seems to push the variance more and stuff. But the way he implemented it, it makes more sense. I would say he basically cut 2 lands for it, since the deck usually, the good consistent versions usually tend to run 20 lands, because 18 is just a tad too greedy and inconsistent. But running 18 lands and 2 Spirit Guides seems like a really nice middle ground between 20 and 18 lands, because you kind of have 20 mana sources, but a lot of games play out in a way that some of your lands are sort of Simian Spirit Guides to begin with. They produce relevant mana once, and after that it wouldn't even matter if they would be gone, because the deck just doesn't utilize the constant mana they provide efficiently anyway. The main downside is that Spirit Guide makes Nakadal slightly worker, arguably. But there's also an upside, like in these grindy games where they just kill everything and don't really present much blockers and stuff. Dropping a Spirit Guide for 3 mana and just slapping a Rancor on it and going to town is a legit possibility that can happen and can make the difference in a game, while a regular hand would just mean you flood more and get closer to losing and grind it out. So yeah, that's really nice. It adds to the explosivity and also provides flood protection while still giving you virtually 20 mana sources, and that seems like a really elegant solution to the whole thing, because it still seems like it should be better than 19 lands, and in my opinion is definitely better than 20 lands or 18 lands. But yeah, there is a possibility that 19 lands and another real card might be slightly better than the Spirit Guides, but I can definitely see them being the way to go, and it's an elegant implementation, and I never thought of the card in this way and implementing in it this way. Like, people brought it up in comments of the article about the deck, if I considered Spirit Guide, and my initial response and instinct was why, like, the card just pushes the variants and takes away slots and stuff. But yeah, if you don't go deep on it and play too many, basically shave the semi-spare lands that kind of just make your mana consistency high enough, and replace them with one-shot mana sources instead, you get a nice, like, elegant middle ground between the two, and get some of the power of Spirit Guide without getting too much of its destabilizing effect on the deck, which is great. And yeah, last but not least, the sideboard, nothing special. Currently 3 Paths to Exile for Tarmogoyf, Death Shadows, Wormcoil Engine, stuff like that. All the big blockers that can come down early enough that you want to get rid of them. And this does the job really well. Also, like, persist creatures out of, like, company decks, Kitchen Finks and stuff that can be really annoying. Or Voice of Resurgence. Next we have 4 Fogbolt for all the, like, small creature decks. In fact, Affinity, all the, like, company mana dog decks, basically everything that has a bunch of, like, small creatures where you have potential for, like, 2/4-1s and tempo swings, unlike tribal decks, elves, merfolk, that sort of stuff. Next we have Eidolon of the Great Revel, basically just like a hedge against combo decks where we're already pretty good because we are so explosive and have a really fast goldfish, but having Eidolon against control and combo decks in addition to increase the blowout potential to either blow them out with a fast draw or just drop an Eidolon and get ahead enough to win that way, just seems great. The card is just really powerful. It's just a bit situational and a bit fragile, and you only have so many slots, and the matchup is already fairly good, so you only want to, like, cement it a bit post-board against these decks often, because they might bring in some stuff to fight you, so gotta fight back a bit at least. Alright, next we have Natural State, basically like anti-affinity hate, comes in against Infect for the Nexus and stuff, and Spells Guides, and just a great all-around card versus various decks in the format. There's Lantern Control with Bridges, there's the rare these days Bogles with Daybreak Coronet, where you gotta, like, hit that to gain enough tempo to win before they stabilize. There is Storm with Pyromancer's Ascension that you might have to get rid of so they don't combo us before we kill them, and so on and so forth. There's plenty of possible targets for this, and 1 mana is brutally efficient and can easily swing the game just by the tempo it provides for a deck like this, and it fits in the curve easily every time thanks to costing 1. And last but not least, we have Tarmogoyf. This comes in against, like, more fair, slower decks with a bunch of removal that try to, like, slow us down or stall us out or stuff like that, and often comes in with the Fogbolt together to be sort of like a package to turn into a more a bit more traditional interactive zoo rather than this very uninteractive go wide push through type of approach. It's another like idea tag of Kalborgam is to simply put Tarmogoyf in the sideboard of a deck like this to have this like sort of mini transformational sideboard, to bring it in against decks that have a lot of smaller creatures than Tarmogoyf, and or even have not that many ways to deal with the Tarmogoyf, especially out of a deck like this. So yeah, I think he started with 1 and went up to 3 because it was so stellar for him. I think at 1 or 2 in the beginning. He went up to 3 just because of how stellar it worked out for him in a lot of matchups where he brought it in. And yeah, it's like a interesting idea and sound logic, and something that I would definitely want to try. And also there's only so many things that go into a sideboard of a highly specialized deck like that, because they have to be flexible, they have to be powerful, and they also have to be very cheap, because 2 mana is already like a lot and the top of the curve for this deck, which is why all these efficient 1 mana cards are so good in this deck and so brutal, because they help you push your tempo advantage or cement it really well. Alright, that's it for the deck list. Let's jump into a competitive league and see how we're doing. Stay tuned for the first match in a moment. Thanks for watching.